Arizona Territory, June 1884. The sun was going down fast when she collapsed onto the porch, too tired to knock. The house sat quiet on the edge of Bisbee, wood faded gray under the desert wind. Verity Vaughn barely made it up the steps before her body gave out. Dust clung to her dress, and her boots were worn thin from walking for days. She curled up on the boards and let sleep take her. It was not safety she found, just the end of strength. Inside, Gideon Hartley was finishing his supper. He had spent the day repairing fence posts after a cattle drive left half of them leaning like drunk men. He lived alone, ever since his father passed 2 winters ago. He kept to himself, steady and quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. When he opened the front door to let the night air in, he nearly stepped on her. She was curled into herself, her back pressed to the wall, arms wrapped tight around her ribs. Gideon knelt fast beside her, touching her shoulder gently. "Madam," he said low, not wanting to startle her. "Can you hear me?" She stirred but did not wake. Her face was pale under the dust, her hands scraped and trembling. Gideon looked around, but the road was empty, no wagon, no horse. Just her. He lifted her carefully. She was light, too light. Her head fell against his chest, and something inside him twisted. He carried her through the doorway, like she was his to protect. He had not known her name, not her story, but the pull in his chest was undeniable. He laid her on the worn settee near the hearth, fetched a blanket, and lit the lantern. Then he sat on the floor beside her and waited. She woke hours later, blinking against the dim light. Her eyes were like storm-washed skies gray, with something broken at the edges. "You are safe," Gideon said. "You were sleeping on my porch." She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to place herself in the world again. "My name's Verity," she said, voice hoarse. "Gideon Hartley. This is my home." She looked down at her hands. "I did not mean to intrude. I could not go any farther." "You do not need to explain anything tonight," he said. "You are welcome here." She tried to sit up, but winced and stayed down. He got her water, bread, and a bowl of stew. She ate slow, like it pained her jaw to chew. After a while, she asked, "Is this still Arizona?" He nodded. "Bisbee, about 5 miles from town." That answer made tears gather in her eyes. "I was headed for Tucson," she whispered. "But I lost the mule 3 days ago. I have been walking since." Gideon leaned forward. "What happened?" Verity looked away. "My husband died last year. And I had to leave the ranch. It was not mine to keep. I thought maybe I could find work in Tucson. I heard there were schools opening. I used to teach. You should not have been out there alone." "I did not have a choice." Gideon did not press her. She sat wrapped in his blanket while the wind kicked sand against the windows. She had the look of someone who had not been safe in a long time. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you being kind to me?" Gideon glanced at the floor, then back to her. "Because someone should be." That answer seemed to undo her. She closed her eyes, and something fragile in her face softened. In the morning, she tried to leave. Gideon caught her at the edge of the yard, carrying her satchel over one shoulder. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "But the sun is already high. You will not make it far without a horse. And I reckon you have not had a full meal in days." Verity looked down. "I can ride to town later," he continued. "Get some supplies. Maybe ask around about work for you. But I would feel better if you stayed, at least until you are strong again." She hesitated. "You do not even know me." Gideon stepped closer. "I know what it looks like when someone has been through too much alone." She blinked fast, jaw tight. Then she nodded. That day passed quiet. She helped him shell beans on the porch. She did not talk much, but she watched everything: his hands, the land, the sky. He did not ask questions, but he noticed things, like how she flinched when a hawk swooped low overhead, how she froze when his hand brushed hers. That night, after supper, he found her dozing in the wooden rocker. He picked her up again, gently, like he had on the first night. Her head fell against his shoulder once more, and something in him settled. She belonged here. He did not know how he knew, but he did. By the end of the week, Verity was stronger. Her cheeks had a bit of color again. She laughed once, quietly, while hanging laundry. Gideon heard it from the barn and smiled to himself. He had not heard laughter in this house since his mother died. She asked if she could work the garden, help with cooking. He let her. Not because he needed her to, but because she seemed to need something to care for. One morning, while he was chopping wood, she came to him, hands clasped tight. "There is something I should tell you," she said. He set the axe down. "All right. I was married young. He was not cruel, but he was not kind either. He died of fever last fall. We had no children. I stayed on the ranch until his brother came to claim it. He gave me 2 days to leave." Gideon nodded, listening. "I had nowhere to go," she said. "I do not have family left. I thought maybe if I got to Tucson, I could start over. But I was not ready for the road." "You do not need to run anymore," he said. "You are safe here." Her eyes filled. "You say that like you mean it." "I do." She stepped forward, close enough that he could see the cracks in her armor. "I do not know what this is between us," she said, voice shaking. "But when you carried me that night, something changed. I felt like I belonged somewhere again." Gideon looked at her, quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I felt it too." She let out a breath like she had been holding it for days. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand. He took it, held it like it was something precious. Neither of them said another word. But something had shifted. They both knew it. By the 3rd week, the wind shifted. Mornings were cooler, and the mesquite trees behind the barn trembled quieter in the breeze. Verity stepped barefoot onto the porch and watched the horizon light up in soft rose. Her hands were damp with flour, and the scent of cornmeal rose behind her from the kitchen. She leaned against the post, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and listened to the hush before Gideon's boots hit the dirt. He came from the pasture, leading a bay mare with a rope looped loose in one hand. "That's not one of yours," Verity said, brushing a strand of hair off her cheek. "No," he said. "Belongs to an old miner up north of town. Her hoof's gone soft. He asked if I'd look after her a spell." She stepped off the porch and stroked the mare's neck. "What's her name?" "Bess." "She's gentle. She's tired." Verity nodded once, slowly. "I know what that feels like." They didn't say anything more about it. Midday brought the sound of hammering. Gideon had cleared space in the barn to build a new storage shelf. The old one had bowed under the weight of seed sacks, and Verity had offered to help. She stood on a wooden crate, holding a beam steady while he nailed it into place. "You always work like this?" she asked, watching the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt. "Like what?" "Like the world might fall apart if you set the hammer down." He paused, wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "I find it easier to keep things in order if my hands stay busy." "Was it always just you out here?" "No. My father stayed on after my mother passed. He was a quiet man. Didn't take to town much." "What happened to him?" "Winter took him. Same week the north fence came down in a storm. I buried him beneath the cottonwood." Verity met his eyes. "You built all this with no one but memory to keep you company?" "Memory's not always a burden," he said. "Sometimes it's what steadies you." She stepped off the crate and dusted her skirt. "I think if I hadn't met you, I might have forgotten how to trust someone's silence." That night, the oil lamp burned low as Verity sat sewing a tear in the hem of her dress. Gideon read at the table, brow furrowed over a tattered almanac. The clock ticked steady on the shelf. When the thread slipped from her needle, she sighed and set it aside. "You always read the same book?" she asked. "Only one I've got with pages still bound. Ever think about getting more?" "I don't get to town often." "I could ride in," she said. "If you've got something to trade, I could look for books. Maybe a few in Spanish too, if you want to practice." He set the almanac down. "You speak more than one language." "I taught children from Sonora for 5 years. Their parents never trusted someone who couldn't speak to them in their own tongue." "I'd like that," he said. "The books. And the learning." She smiled, slow and small. "You'd be good at it." They rose at dawn each day, side by side. She took to feeding the chickens while he mucked the stalls. They didn't speak much in those early hours, but their movements fell into rhythm, like the land had folded them into its pattern. One afternoon, a storm rolled in sudden and sharp. Verity was in the field, gathering herbs that had taken root along the fence line. When the first crack of thunder split the sky, Gideon was already running. He found her crouched low, skirt soaked, clutching a handful of wild yarrow. "You trying to get struck?" he shouted over the wind. "I couldn't leave it. They only bloom like this for a few days." He pulled her up by the arm, her hand still holding the stems. "You'll get another chance." "Not this season." He didn't argue, just wrapped his coat around her shoulders and led her back toward the house. Rain pelted them both, heavy and cold. By the time they reached the porch, they were dripping. Inside, she peeled off the coat and held it out. I'm sorry. For what? For making you run out into all that. He took the coat from her and hung it on the peg by the door. I'd do it again. She looked up at him then, hair wet and sticking to her cheek. Would you? She asked. His voice came quiet. Yes. She stared a moment longer, then stepped close enough that her breath stirred the damp fabric of his shirt. I don't think I've known a man who meant something like that. You do now? Her chest rose and fell, slow. I want to believe it. Then stay. Not just until you've found your footing. Stay because you want to. She didn't answer, but she didn't step away either. That night, she laid her bundle of herbs on the table to dry. He watched her hands move, gentle and certain, and thought how strange it was that someone could arrive like a storm herself and still bring peace. When she turned, he was still watching. Have you ever been in love? She asked. No, why not? No one ever stayed long enough for it. She looked at the bundle of yarrow, then back at him. Maybe this time's different. He nodded once. Maybe it is. Neither of them looked away. By early July, the hills around Bisbee turned brittle and gold. Grass crunched beneath boots, and the sky took on a pale, watchful stillness. Verity stood in the barn doorway one afternoon, apron damp with well water, her gaze fixed on the southeast ridge. Gideon was mending tack on a bench just inside, rubbing oil into cracked leather with practiced hands. She spoke without looking at him. I had a sister once. Clara, 2 years younger. He paused, setting the strap down. What happened to her? She married a man in Kansas. Letters stopped after the floods. I don't know if she's gone or just couldn't write anymore. He waited, letting her choose the depth. She had this way of making everything sound sweeter than it was, Verity continued. Even when our mother was ill, Clara said she'd float away on a breeze like a seed, and I believed her. You ever think of looking for her? I did, but I couldn't find enough to go on. And then life kept moving. Gideon stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. If you ever want to try again, I'll help. Verity turned to him then. Why? He held her gaze. Because you're not alone anymore. She nodded once. I think I needed to hear that more than I realized. The next day, she carried a bucket down toward the spring. The path was narrow and shaded by cottonwoods, their roots snaking through the dirt. At the water's edge, she knelt and dipped the pail, letting her fingers trail through the surface. A wood thrush sang from somewhere above, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't tense at the sound. Gideon came down later, a coil of rope over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her sitting on the bank, skirt gathered around her knees. I thought you'd already be back, he said. I stayed longer than I meant to. You all right? I think so, she said. It's strange, isn't it? How quiet can feel like a comfort again. He crouched beside her, letting the rope drop beside his boots. You've changed. So have you. You think so? I used to see tension in your jaw every time I came into a room. Now you look at me like you're glad I'm there. I am. She looked down at her hands. I've been thinking about staying. His voice came low. You'd be welcome. I mean truly staying. Not just through summer. Gideon glanced at the current, then back at her. I've never asked anyone to share this life. Didn't think I had anything worth offering. You do, she said. You have steadiness. And you listen. That's more than most men ever learned how to give. They walked back in silence, the bucket sloshing between them. When they reached the porch, Verity paused halfway up the steps. Do you remember the first night? She asked. I remember carrying you in. I wasn't sure I'd wake up. Part of me didn't want to. He laid a hand against the post beside her. You're here now? You didn't give up. I didn't know what I was walking toward. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. I think sometimes that's enough. She turned toward him, her voice steadier now. I want to build something again. Something that won't be taken away. He nodded. Then let's do that. Later that week, Gideon brought her to the small field behind the barn, where the soil stayed dark and damp even in heat. He handed her a spade and pointed to the far edge. We can start a kitchen garden here. Beans, maybe squash. You said you liked growing things. I do, she said, already kneeling. They worked until the sun dipped below the ridge, sweat streaking their temples, hands dirt-stained and aching. When they finally stood, she brushed soil off her palms and looked at the rows they'd turned. It's not much yet, she said. It will be. That night, He found her on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, her feet tucked beneath the rocker. He sat beside her and leaned back, the wood creaking gently beneath his weight. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right. When you think about the future, what do you see?" "I see this place," he said without hesitation, full with the sound of someone else's footsteps. Maybe a child's laughter one day. A table with more than one chair pulled out. A life that doesn't feel like waiting. She reached for his hand, folding her fingers around his. "I see it too." He looked at her then, truly looked at the curve of her mouth, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she held herself like she had decided, finally, to stay rooted. "You came here with nothing," he said. "And yet you've given me more than I ever expected to have." "I think maybe we were both waiting for something to grow," she said. "We just didn't know it would be each other." He didn't answer with words. He stood, pulled her gently to her feet, and folded her into his arms. She rested her head against his chest, and the porch faded around them, the lantern, the empty fields, the hush of a wind preparing to shift again. Inside, the house waited. Not empty, not silent, but full of something new, something steady. Neither of them let go. The August heat settled in thick, pressing down on the land like a held breath. Even the air inside the house felt still, as though it too waited. Gideon came in from the pasture just past sundown, shirt clinging to his back, boots dusted white from the dry earth. Verity stood at the table cutting peaches into a crock, her sleeves rolled, apron damp at the waist. "I traded for these today," she said without turning. "A woman down near the copper camp sells them by the basket. Said they came in sweeter than usual this year." Gideon set his hat on the peg. "You went all the way out there?" "I took the mare. She walks slow, but she doesn't complain." He crossed the room and leaned against the counter, watching her. "You get what you needed?" "I did. And something more." She paused, then looked up at him. "I saw a notice posted outside the livery. The schoolhouse near Tombstone is hiring again. They need someone by October." His arms folded slowly. "You thinking of applying?" "I'm not sure yet. I just wanted to tell you I saw it." He studied her face a moment. "If you took it, would you live there?" "I wouldn't want to," she said. "It's not the right town for me. But it made me wonder if I could teach again. Maybe even here in time." "There's no schoolhouse in Bisbee." "Not yet," she said, voice soft with thought. "But there are children. The blacksmith's boy, the young ones from the Mexican Quarter. They deserve something better than what they've got." He reached for a peach slice and bit into it. "You'd build something from nothing again?" "I would," she said, "if I knew I had a place to come home to." "You do." He said it simply, but his voice held weight. She nodded, satisfied, then turned back to her work. The next morning, she found him out by the fence line with a stranger, an older man with a crooked gait and a rifle strapped across his back. She hesitated, but Gideon waved her over. "Verity, this is Elias Monroe," he said. "Used to ride with my father. He's been living out past Miller Gulch." Elias tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am." Verity looked between them. "Everything all right?" Elias said, "There've been folks sniffing around the southern border of the property," Gideon said. "Surveyors, maybe. No one's claimed anything yet, but I want to be ready." "Ready for what?" she asked. "To prove this land's been worked, fenced, and lived on for over 20 years, Gideon said. "They can't take what's not theirs, but they'll try if they think no one's watching." Elias nodded. "You've got good soil here. They'll want it." Verity's hands curled beneath her apron. "What do we need to do?" "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Gideon said. "See if the land office has heard anything." Elias offered to stay a few days, keep watch near the ridge. "I'll bring him supper tonight," she said, already considering what she could spare. That evening, she brought a tin plate out to where Elias was camped under the lean-to. He accepted it with a nod, but his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual. "You're not from here," he said. "I'm not," she answered. "But you're staying." She met his eyes. "I am." He gave a slow nod, then turned back to his food. When she returned to the house, Gideon was at the wash basin, rinsing grit from his hands. "He's a good man," he said without looking up. "He wants to protect what matters to you." Gideon dried his hands on a cloth and turned to her. "That includes you." She leaned against the doorframe. "I know." When he stepped forward, she didn't move. He reached out, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "I've been thinking," he said. "If you want to start a school, we could clear the old smokehouse. It's strong-walled, and no one's used it in years." Her breath caught. You'd give that to me? I'd give you anything that helped you stay. Her hand rose, fingers curling lightly into the fabric of his shirt. You say things like that and make it hard not to love you. He didn't flinch. Then don't hold back. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain. It was full. They stood close, the kind of close that had nothing to do with distance and everything to do with choice. Later that night, he brought out a tin box from beneath the bed. Inside were faded deeds, his father's ledger, and a letter sealed in wax. This is all I have to prove I belong here, he said. Verity ran her fingers over the pages, careful not to smudge the ink. It's enough. You've lived the proof. The next week, she started drawing up a list of children she knew of within a day's ride. She spoke with mothers in the market, offered to trade herbs for stories, and asked what they wanted for their sons and daughters. Gideon built new shelves in the smokehouse, cleared the floor, and patched the roof. He didn't ask her what she needed, he let her tell him. One afternoon, he came in and found her sewing a small curtain for the single window. You're making it a home, he said. I already have one, she replied without looking up. That night, as the stars came out clear and sharp above the hills, she stepped onto the porch and found him sitting on the steps, elbows on his knees. She sat beside him, her hand finding his without hesitation. You ever think about what we'd be if I hadn't stopped here? She asked. I try not to, he said, because I can't imagine anything else now. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Under that quiet sky, with no more need for running or proving anything, they sat together, two people who'd built something out of ruin, who'd chosen each other not out of necessity, but from the slow, certain pull of something true. And from that truth, they would shape the rest of their days. The last of the summer storms rolled through in early September, leaving behind a sky hard and blue and the scent of wet iron in the dirt. Verity stood barefoot in the doorway of the old smokehouse, now swept clean and ringed with mismatched chairs. A long table stood in the center, planed and sanded by Gideon's hand, its legs made from salvaged fence posts. The place still smelled faintly of cedar and sun-heated stone. She ran her fingers along the table's edge. They'll come, she said, not needing to raise her voice. The mothers promised. 3 boys, 2 girls. One of them's near grown, but she never learned her letters. Gideon leaned against the frame of the open window, arms crossed. It's a start. I don't need more than that. He watched her a long moment, then said, I've been thinking about building on. She turned toward him. Where? East side of the house. A room with windows. Maybe a second door. Somewhere that's yours. I don't need space from you. I know, but I want you to have something you didn't have to ask for. She stepped closer. What if I want everything with you in it? He didn't speak right away. Then, without looking away from her, he said, There's a ring in my father's chest. It was my mother's. I thought it might sit empty forever. Verity reached out, her hand resting lightly over the center of his chest. If you gave me a ring, I'd wear it. I wouldn't ask unless I meant for it to be permanent. Then ask. He did, not with a flourish or practiced words, just a steady voice and both hands holding hers. Will you marry me, Verity? Yes. They stood quiet after that, the way two people do when the world shifts beneath them in a way that feels like settling, not shaking. They married beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn 2 weeks later. Mrs. Alvarez from town stitched Verity's dress from unbleached muslin, and Gideon wore his father's vest, brushed clean and mended where the seam had split beneath the arm. Elias stood as witness, along with the blacksmith and his wife, who brought cornbread and sweet coffee for the gathering. Afterward, they laid a quilt on the grass and passed around plates until the sun slipped low. Verity sat with her back against Gideon's chest, her knees drawn up, and her head turned just enough to hear his breath. I didn't think I'd feel this again, she whispered. Feel what? Full. He was quiet a moment, then pressed his mouth to her temple. You filled this place the day you stepped on the porch. She turned her face toward him, and he kissed her slow and sure. That night, they didn't sleep in separate corners of the house. He carried her over the threshold, not out of tradition, but from the fierce joy of knowing she was his to protect and love. The fire burned low, and they undressed by its light, not rushed, not uncertain. Theirs was a love built in silence, in work-worn hands and long glances across the yard. That night, they let it be spoken. When dawn came, it found them tangled beneath the quilt, warm skin against warm skin, and no parting between them. In the weeks that followed, the schoolhouse filled slowly. Children came with bare feet and wind-tangled hair. Verity taught them with a patience that surprised even her, and Gideon watched from the window some mornings, hammer paused mid-stroke, just to see her mouth shape the words. When the harvest came in early October, they brought in baskets of squash and beans, and Gideon carved a space near the hearth for drying herbs. Verity kept her hands busy in the evenings, but her eyes always found his across the room. One night, she sat beside him on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder. "I want to plant an orchard come spring. Apples, maybe a peach or two." He nodded. "We'll dig the holes together. I want roots that last." "You've already got them." She turned her head, rested her chin on his shoulder. "You think it'll always feel this solid?" "No," he said, "but I think we'll hold steady through the parts that don't." Her smile came slow. "I believe you." They grew into their life without rush. Gideon added the new room before winter whitewashed walls, a hand-cut frame for her books, and a window that caught the morning light. She filled it with dried flowers, student drawings, and a heavy wool rug gifted by a mother who could not pay in coin. By the first frost, the town had begun to speak of her as the woman who taught with dignity and the man who built her a life with his own hands. They never left Bisbee. There was no need. The land gave them enough, and their love quiet, steady, unshaken filled the rest. Years passed, but they kept their rituals. Cutting wood in the cool of dawn, evening walks past the edge of their property, reading by firelight. Gideon's hair turned silver first, and Verity teased him for it, tracing the strands like they were medals earned. On their 10th winter together, he built her a bench beneath the cottonwood where they'd wed. She sat there most mornings, wrapped in a shawl, watching the sun rise over the hills. He joined her one morning, a cup of coffee in each hand. "You think we've done all right?" he asked. She took hers with a nod. "We've done better than all right." He leaned in, kissed her cheek. "I'd do it all again. Every hour of it." She smiled into her cup. "So would I." And that was the truth of it. They had found each other in ruin, built a life from nothing but trust and time, and in the end, they had everything they needed: love, land, and the quiet joy of growing old together in a place they made with their own hands.